It's called the Red Summer. Race riots in dozens of American cities in 1919, including Chicago.
Here, tension mounted for months as African Americans migrated from the South, needing jobs and housing. White Chicagoans resisted with violence. And as CBS 2's Jim Williams reports, it all came to a head 100 years ago tomorrow.
My mother was crying.
Juanita Mitchell, today 107, carries a childhood memory, the frightening noise of a mob right outside of her home.
What was the noise like?
They were just yelling at us. All of a sudden I heard my uncle say, "Here they come." And when he said that, it meant that the white folks were coming down 35th Street.
35th Street, where she lived with her family in Bronzeville. White gangs were looking to attack African Americans. Juanita and her little sister hid behind a piano.
Yes, my sister and I were very afraid. We didn't know what to expect.
Just one sliver of the violence that engulfed Chicago 100 years ago this week, when Juanita Mitchell was 7 years old. The 1919 Chicago race riots left an indelible mark on Miss Mitchell and the city.
The riots in Chicago shaped Chicago socially, racially, economically for the next 100 years, up to this very day.
It began on the lakefront on July 27th. A line, though informal, was ironclad at the 29th Street beach. Whites on one side, blacks on the other. Eugene Williams, a young black man on a homemade raft, drifted over to the white side of the lake. A white man hit Williams with a rock, and Williams drowned.
The man who threw the stone was identified by other African Americans, and the police were called and told, "Here's the guy who threw the rock," but the police refused to arrest the thrower of the stone.
A black man fired into the crowd and was gunned down by police. Over the next week and across miles, the riots killed nearly 40 Chicagoans, most of them black, injured hundreds, and left thousands homeless.
Whites really tried to attack and invade and otherwise terrorize black communities in Chicago.
But white gangs met resistance. African American soldiers, just back from World War I, stood guard.
And they knew how to fight. Didn't want to, a battle they didn't ask for, but they weren't going to just take it by that.
But white gangs met resistance.
But white gangs met resistance. But white gangs met resistance.
African American soldiers, just back from World War I, stood guard.
Don't let anybody take your manhood.
African American soldiers, just back from World War I, stood guard.
And they knew how to fight. Didn't want to, a battle they didn't ask for, but they weren't going to just take it by that.
That spirit of resistance would later inspire black Chicagoans to build businesses and seek political power, making it possible for Chicago to elect African Americans mayor decades later.
But I think that that's less to do with Chicago having open arms and welcoming us, and more to do with determination, perhaps coming out of those riots, that we are here and we're going to make our place here, regardless.
Still, the riots left a bleak legacy: strained relations between the black community and police, and racial segregation.
White institutions start finding ways to informally and formally segregate. If we keep people separate, then maybe there won't be more rioting.
An impact felt across Chicago for generations, but it was at the doorstep of a 7-year-old girl that Juanita Mitchell saw the racial strife and its terrifying consequences.
And we were afraid to death.
Afraid to death. It was a terrible time, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Jim Williams, CBS 2 News.
And after those riots, city leaders appointed a biracial commission to investigate what happened and to suggest how to prevent more violence. The conclusion: better education, police community relations, better housing, and jobs. Issues we still discuss a century later.
This year marks 100 years since the Chicago race riot. It's a tragic event that has shaped politics and race relations in the city.
Not a lot of Chicagoans know the story, but there's a push to educate and explore solutions to problems today that harkens back to this very difficult period in our history. WGN's Tonya Francisco has more.
1919 was the year of racial uprisings. It was dubbed the Red Summer by author James Weldon Johnson. There were more than 36 race riots in cities across the country, but none were as violent or as deadly as the one in Chicago. Chicago, circa 1919, was a city on edge. Much like Ferguson, Missouri in the summer of 2014, and Baltimore in the spring of 2015.
I was watching these images on my TV screen, and it called up that memory of my grandmother's story, and I wanted to find out, what was this riot in 1919?
Claire Hartfield is the author of A Few Red Drops, a book about the Chicago race riot. She learned about the notorious chapter of Chicago's history as a child from her grandmother, who was caught in the violence as she rode a streetcar.
Looked out her window, she saw these mobs, growing mobs of young men, black men and white men, in the streets, fighting fiercely and throwing rocks at the streetcar.
Turns out that was the first of 5 days of the most violent rioting this city has ever seen. At the time, Chicago was a tinderbox of racial tensions. White soldiers returning from World War I were afraid they wouldn't get their high-paying jobs in the stockyards and meat-packing plants back, while blacks who had been recruited from the South to fill them feared they would be fired. Black soldiers returning from the war refused to put up with racial discrimination after they had risked their lives for the country. Union differences also fueled the anger. Whites were in favor of the better pay and job protections unions could provide, while blacks worried about discrimination. Politically, whites were staunchly Democratic, while blacks were Republicans, the party of Lincoln who freed the slaves. And overcrowding and poor housing conditions contributed to the divide. The black community, which had more than doubled from nearly 50,000 to more than 100,000 in 2 short years, was mostly restricted to living in a small area on the South Side called the Black Belt. When they tried to move out, they faced backlash.
Part of that backlash was violent, with bombings, and part of that backlash was more technical, where groups of real estate associations got together and instructed people in their neighborhoods, don't sell or rent to any black families that are coming your way.
In short, Chicago was a city just waiting to explode, and it did on July 27th.
It was horrific. It was the worst riot in Chicago history.
It was sparked by an incident at 29th Street Beach. A group of black teens were on a raft playing around and didn't realize they had drifted over an invisible line into the white part of the beach. A white man became infuriated and started throwing rocks. 17-year-old Eugene Williams ended up drowning, either from being hit by one of the rocks or from being too afraid to swim back to shore.
This is Connecting Chicago.
Lisa Lolson is the director of Chicago Studies at Newberry Library.
That moment of violence really ignited the city, which was brimming, seething with racial tensions leading up to that moment.
Anger began to build when a white police officer refused to arrest the man accused of throwing the rock, and false rumors quickly spread throughout the community as the story became distorted about who died and why.
There were some gangs, some white immigrant gangs that had been waiting to foment violence, and this was their moment. So they went to their clubhouses, they got their guns, they went into the black community, and from there it just exploded.
There were beatings and bombings. 38 people ended up dying, more than 500 were injured. It caused millions of dollars in property damage while leaving about 1,000 families, mostly black, homeless. Peace was eventually restored when the governor called in the National Guard and a hard driving rain forced people inside. It was later determined Irish-American gangs from nearby Bridgeport were the main instigators of the rioting.
And those boys grow up to be our civic leaders. That's real, and the powerful political machines that have ruled Chicago in those 100 years, what are their interests? How has Chicago been built out of that kind of civic leadership?
One 17-year-old gang member in particular, Richard J. Daley, went on to become the longtime mayor of Chicago. Daley never confirmed nor denied whether he took part in the rioting, but his supporters have said he had no involvement. In 1922, the Chicago Commission on Race Relations was formed to take a deep dive into the cause and consequences of the riot. It released a 672-page report titled The Negro in Chicago, a study of race relations and a race riot.
It was a call for the community as a whole to take ownership and responsibility and be accountable for what was going on broadly in our city, and to come together and to do something about it.
The report was written by a black sociologist named Charles Johnson, who had been working for the Chicago Urban League at the time of the riots. Barbara Lumpkin is the interim president and CEO of the civil rights organization.
Our work is very important still, and the work that we do is just as relevant today as it was in 1919.
Today, the Chicago Urban League is one of 14 cultural institutions across the city, including the Newberry Library, taking part in a year-long exploration of the history and legacy of the 1919 Chicago race riot.
We want to think hard about how 1919 is really a moment that helps us understand so many of the problems that Chicago is still grappling with.
The approach, perhaps, to how we address some of the issues that we are facing is slightly different, but the core issues remain the same.
But the reality, according to Claire Hartfield,
we still have a long way to go.
It's no doubt a difficult period in Chicago's history to face, but the hope is by opening it up to conversation, a way forward can be found. Tonya Francisco, WGN News.
Don't let anybody take your manhood.
You are now listening to P.A.R. That's People Activity Radio. And I'm your host, John G. Horse. Welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place. P.A.R. aims to be a family-friendly information distribution program seeking to inform non-white people, in particular black classified, and assist in counter-racist codification. Yes, indeed. This is our first show of 2020. Happy New Year to all, and to all a good night. Happy MLK Day, baby. Yes, indeed. A rider, a soldier who put in the work to assist and counter racist codification. Let's move on. The title of today's show is The 1919 Chicago, Illinois Race Riot, Bronzeville, Black Belt, Black Metropolis, Policy Kings, and the myth of Black American cowardice. You know how we do? You know what we do? We look at historical events. We look at non-discussed, non-taught, in the dark, hidden historical events which involve documented counter-racist violence by people who classified or who are subject to black classification. And under that context, I'm going to read the title to you once again. And the title of today's episode is The 1919 Chicago, Illinois Race Riot, Bronzeville, Black Belt, Black Metropolis, Policy Kings, and the myth of Black American cowardice. Let's get it in. So I'm going to begin with the first clip that I played, And I thought it was appropriate because when looking at the so-called 1919 Chicago race riot, hold on. I almost forgot. Here on P.A.R, People Activity Radio, when discussing these events, these purges, these anti-black federal government, state government supported purges throughout this nation, we often see in suspected white supremacist publications the term attributed to these events, and they'll call them race riots. In most cases, they're anti-black white mob ambushes, and these anti-black white mob ambushes almost every time are targeting the economy, the economic strength, the political power of the targeted group, which in most cases in the United States of America throughout our history are people who are subject to black classification. So race riot is not an accurate term. I have concluded, and I could be in error. Feel free to correct me if I'm talking crazy. But these events, if you're going to accurately coin them, are racial clashes. And I say racial clash because in almost 100% of these events, in the attempted ambush, the anti-black white mob ambush directed toward the foundational black American communities, foundational black and American economic district, foundational black American business district, foundational black American part of town. Whenever the white mob anti-black ambushers came onto the scene, they were met with motivated, enthusiastic, counter-racist violence from men, women, and children who are subject or who were subject to black classification. And that is why these events always seem to be drawn out, and then the state militias called in to support the anti-black white mob. Nowhere in these stories will you ever find black men, women, or children who defended their property, who defended their family, who defended their businesses, who defended their lives. You will never see in any of the publications or the articles written about these events putting them in a heroic light. You will not see them putting them in a just position. Every time you read suspected white supremacist publications or articles written about these events and this particular event, the 1919 Chicago racial clash, you will always find foundational black Americans who didn't turn no cheeks called criminal elements. You would always see foundational black American men and women and children who wasn't ready to back down, and who fired back, who punched back, who threw back, who shot back, who took eyes for eyes and tooths for tooths, teeth for teeth, whatever. You understand me? You will always call them the hoodlums, the criminal element. You understand that. And once you start to look at these articles and the information written on these events, you will start to see the need for counter-racist codification. And that is what we're here for. That's what the show is for. People Activity Radio looks and analyzes contemporary and past history involving foundational black Americans, black people worldwide. And we look at the information that has been pounded upon us by the dominant society from their perspective, and we take a position to look at it from our perspective with the evidence that we have. And every time we're using archives of evidence from people who classify themselves as white and we suspect, believe in racism, white supremacy, we are extremely suspicious. That's the code. That's the code. And under that context, the 1919 Chicago, Illinois racial clash we are going to discuss. Now, when looking at this event, it is easy to look at it from what most publications say how it started. Look at it from that perspective, and the company line is there was a young man in a lake that was a segregated lake, and he crossed the imaginary segregated line, and the white citizens who were in that lake started throwing rocks at him, hit him upside the head or something. Some publications say he couldn't swim, he drowned. Some publications say he got knocked upside the head and he drowned. Some publications say he was afraid to swim the shore and he drowned. But the brother died. Teenager, I believe he was 16, 17 years old. I don't have the name, do the research. I'm not here for that. I'm here to give the information. I'm giving you the source, the 1919 race riot of Chicago, Illinois. You'll find that story. But I digress. So, black patrons, black citizens who were there, probably his family members, his friends, and just other black folk who understood that when white folks started being white folks, the only thing you could do was fight or flight, and most times, black folks fought. Especially in Chicago, 1919. That wasn't nothing out of the usual.
Don't let anybody take your man.
Some of the mainstream publications say that a black male fired into a white crowd and he was put down, shot, or killed by local suspected white supremacist Chicago police officers. Now, I'm going to say this. That's two down. That's two bodies down. Young black male drowned, and another black male probably defending his family member, somebody he knew, against the threat, because I'm quite sure the suspected white supremacists on the scene had weapons also. But when the cavalry came, the so-called Chicago Police Department, they took it upon themselves to neutralize the black folk. Word got back to the white community. All these Negroes, they running amok. They had the nerve to fire upon this group. And from most of the articles and publications, a lot of the Irish white gangs decided, hey, we've been trying to move in on this black community and all this money they got flowing through there. This is the perfect opportunity. Race riot. Anti-black ambush. That was what they thought was going to happen. And it's easy to look at it from what it's told, but I'm not going to look at it from that. I am going to try to dig deeper into this incident and give my perspective, and hopefully it motivates folks of like mind to investigate these events that we talk about and to come up with their perspective and come up with a code, because we got to deal with this element. Not only did they have to deal with it in 1919 and 1920, we had to deal with it in 2019 and 2020, but I digress.
Don't let anybody take your man.
Let's move on. So instead of started in 1919 talking about when two brothers were murdered in cold blood at the lake, one brother by a white mob, the other brother in defense of the black male that was murdered, he was put down by the Chicago police. I'm going to start in 1877. LaRon Bennett Jr., the first clip that I played was talking about the Compromise of 1877. The Compromise of 1877 is well documented. You can look that up. All it is talking about is the element of the white Republican Party who were anti-slave abolitionists who in some cases assisted foundational Black Americans in their quest to abolish slavery. They decided that, okay, slavery no longer exists, but I'm not willing to keep taking these lumps from the Klan Party, which was the Democratic Party, who had no problem bombing white folks, hanging white folks, killing white folks, threatening white folks, who were Negro sympathizers. I mean, it was straight up and down chaos in the United States. From 1865 to 1877, white folks had to come together and actually agree on how we was going to continue to practice dominance over people who we classify as Black. Well, wasn't nothing going to pop off until the Southern sympathizers, the children of the Confederacy and the Confederate veterans, were compensated from that whooping that the foundational Black American troops put on that rump in 1865, 1664, 1865. And they were salty from that ill because whoever participated in that war, most of the documented testimony from the war from people who were classified as white, Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant and all these people, and they was dripping and bleeding, self-proclaimed white supremacists, all these white folks, but they couldn't not admit that the war would not have been won without the contributions of foundational Black Americans. And it is well documented on P.A.R. I have a show that talks about Black patriots and them saving the Union. Look that up. I'm not going to go into depth, but I am starting in 1877. Once that compromise came, Black folks understood we do not have any real allies. We're going to have to survive in this climate, in this reality of anti-Blackness. And ain't nobody coming to save us. We got to tool up, defend what's ours, and whatever it means, whatever happens, gonna happen. But we gonna get our liberty or death. I mean, that was the culture anyway. Wasn't nothing new. All that respectability politics, that's just a plea for a minority of foundational Black Americans who thought that getting next to white folks and getting a crumb from their table was the best way to go. That's that talented tits respectability politic mess. A lot of us didn't have no stake in that game. We didn't really need anybody for anything. So if they want to separate away from us, I don't want to eat their unseasoned food anyway. They can't dance. They can't sing. Their music is corny and horrible. They don't season their food. What do I want to be next to them for? What is the draw? Everything that's popping is in my community. So foundational Black Americans ran with it. 1865, we freed ourselves. Liberty or death. For 10 years. From that work that we put in, we had accumulated land, resources, political power, and we were lapping every other group in this country. Had to be dealt with. I can understand the suspected white supremacists saying, oh, this got to be dealt with. Man, God, dog. They 10 years removed from slavery, and they running things. So, 1877, the compromise was, hey, I'll turn my cheek when y'all do what y'all do, as long as I get my cut. Republicans and Democrats, two of the same coin, wings of the same bird. The only difference between the two is their ideals and beliefs on how to maintain dominance for people who classify themselves as white. And we suspect these people believe in racism, white supremacy. So, after the compromise, black folks nationwide, from city to city, from state to state, started setting up parallel economies. They call this segregation, shadow economies, etc., etc. We ain't really have to deal with none of these white folks. From my perspective, what was actually taking place was basically we were stateless maroons. When left alone, we just would build. Next thing you know, white folks are peeking on us, and we got thousandaires, millionaires, franchises popping. You understand me? And then they got wait a minute. We in a depression. You understand? 1919, 1920, 1921, 1922, 1923, 1924, 1925, 1926, 1927, 1928, 1929, 1930. This was the Depression era for white folks. So they say, that's what I was taught in school. But when you start flipping the pages and looking at the numbers and looking at the books of the black economies in the early 1900s, when left alone by the white supremacists, we wasn't depressed. It was popping. Can you understand the climate? Can you understand when white immigrants come over here and they see Negroes got things popping and they were told that they got this thing called white classification and they supposed to be on top? You got black folks in Chicago, New York, Miami, New Orleans, Missouri, California. I mean, black folks, Texas, Houston, everywhere Carolina, Baltimore, Maryland, everywhere we are, it's popping. Gold teeth, suited and booted. What they used to call us? Dandy. I mean, just sports, clean. You following me? What's the brother's name that was the champ back in the day? Jack John. Oh my gosh. I'm digressing. But what I'm saying is we wasn't running around here with empty plates, knocking at white folks' door begging. It was popping where we was. So in Chicago in 1919, I'm giving you an understanding of what was actually taking place outside of just white terror domination. There's a method to the madness. It's always about the money. You understand me? So in 1885 in Chicago, Illinois, a couple of so-called economy men got together and they formed this thing called policy. Policy was basically the name in Chicago for the numbers running racket. Illegal, but it was the thing of the norm, the numbers running racket. We know this stuff today as the state lotto. But I digress. And in 1885, these under economy race men got together, just doing what they do, hustling, not asking nothing from white folks. And by 1919, they were multimillionaires. It said they was making up to 20 and 25 million annually each off the numbers racket, non-violent. Not talking about no drugs. I'm not talking about no killing. I'm talking about numbers. 3-number combos, 5-number combos, 4-number combos. I think they had like 3 or 4 numbers a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can pay a penny, you can pay a nickel, you can pay $1, you can put 50 on it. Numbers. What these brothers was doing, multimillionaires, Chicago, Illinois. Started in 1885. Now, were they the mob? Were they the mafia? I don't know what they were, but they were brothers who lived with the gun. They were brothers that didn't follow no anti-black legislation talking about you can't arm yourself and you can't put your hand on white folks. That wasn't part of the code. The code was,
Don't let anybody take your
yes,
manhood.
indeed. Don't let nobody take your manhood. You don't got to beg no white folks, got to sit up at no courthouse. You don't got to sit up begging no politicians. You don't got to do nothing. Just go do what you got to do and tool up to protect your interests. And the interesting thing about the policy founders, they all were coined racemen, meaning they would take the resources from the numbers game and then reinvest the resources in the black community, in which we are talking about right now, Bronzeville, or the Black Metropolis, Black Belt. See, these terms were used in black publications when they would promote their events. I believe they used to have a Miss Bronzeville, Illinois pageant, and that's where they get the Bronzeville from. Finance. By the policy kings. You understand me? Now, understanding that foundational black American men and women were in control and complete control of their destiny as it pertains to the political element of Bronzeville, Chicago, as it pertains to the economic element of Bronzeville, Chicago, as it pertains to the infrastructure, as it pertains to the business, meaning black folks wasn't really going to no banks. They was going to the policy kings to start up their businesses. When a fighter like the Bronze Bomber needed to be endorsed, financed, or what's the term they use in boxing? Management. Well, they were behind boxers and celebrities. If I'm not mistaken, I think they had a robust black film company in Chicago. Now, whether it was financed by the policy kings, I don't know. Look that up. I don't got the name right now. I believe the founder of that film company last name was Michaud. It was a brother. He had a French last name. But I digress. I mean, it was everything popping in Chicago. Now let's get to 1919. Talking about some boy got knocked upside the head. That sparked the riot. That didn't spark the riot. The mafia, the Italian mob, the Irish mob, the state prosecutors, the state police. You understand me? The state's attorneys. Everybody was after the policy kings. All these groups were classified as white. The ambitious Irish gang who led the white mob violence in 1919 upon Bronzeville was trying to get to that money. It was the perfect time to invade and ambush the black community, destroying their ability to control their economics. And in this case, I believe they were after the policy kings who were in charge of the numbers racket, who was producing multi-millionaires in the black community in 1919, 1920, 1921, 1922, all the way up to 1970s before they got taken down. But I digress. I've been living 40 plus years. John G. Horse have been living 40 plus years, and I've yet to see a film about this history. Listen. Let me just get the information. I'm not going to go on a tirade. 2020, I'm going to stop with the tirades. You understand me? So, they came up in there raising hell, thinking that they were just going to run through the black community, and it was once again. Not only was it the under economy, the hoodlums, the organized criminal element of Chicago that were classified as black that stopped and protected the black community and its citizens. It was also World War I veterans who was putting in that word. Up to 30 to 40 people were reported to have died, and they say 25 blacks and 15 whites. Whites was getting that work. You're coming down that street, you're gonna catch that heat. That's what it was. Everybody was coming and pounded upon the black community. What is very rarely reported is black community made counterstrikes into the main white business district, destroying some of their business. But again, they gloss over that in the mainstream publications. But that's neither here nor there. But my point is this: there has never been a time in United States history where people who are subject to black classification has not returned white mob violence with counter racist violence. It is just what we've done. It's what we do. Now, it was a 5-day racial clash. I believe the governor of Illinois had to call in the National Guard. And we know how that ends. The cavalry came. When the cavalry is called, the cavalry is not called to bring justice. The cavalry is called to neutralize the black element, the black threat. You understand me? It's very easy to get caught up in all the details and all the articles because this is there's a lot of information on this subject, but I try to look at it from an economic perspective, a foundational black American economic perspective. Some of the wealthiest black men and women on the planet were in Bronzeville, Illinois during that time, running numbers. Makes it very suspicious on how the Chicago Lotto was actually taken away. This isn't about the policy kings. This isn't about the numbers runners and those race men, but you have to understand that they are part of this story. And in this story, you're talking about wealth being created all over Chicago, Illinois, and that wealth was attacked by white mob violence. Last time that I checked, no people who are classified as black have received compensation, corrective action, or reparation from the damages, the trauma, and the wealth lost during this event. That is why I call foundational black Americans a stateless group. We're literally maroons in modern day time, because what is owed to foundational black Americans from the damages and the trauma and the crime and the theft and the terror that is still being pounded upon us on a daily, a nightly, a yearly, and hourly basis, we have yet to be compensated or receive treatment or reparations for the damages from the federal government. Matter of fact, the federal government ignores what is owed and chooses to act as if we don't exist, which makes me come to the conclusion of we're maroons. Now, I could be in error, I could sound crazy, but if the state ain't taking care of you, paying taxes, you participating in military, you doing everything that you're supposed to do, and when crimes are committed upon you by other groups within that state, and the state says, don't nobody gotta recognize the rights. Nobody white gotta recognize the rights of anybody black. Dred Scott decision. and that ain't never been dealt with or overturned, come on now. Who we fooling? Codification is this: looking at your reality, analyzing the evidence, and developing correct thought, speech, and action. Under this context, what if anti-black mobs want to just start this stuff up again? Are we ready? Are we prepared? Are we in the right state of mind? Do we have correct thought, speech, and action? Instead of sitting on my hands, I take time out of my day, out of my life energy, my creative energy to bring forth the information, to bring forth the evidence, to engage young, middle-aged, and older listeners. You don't got to be running around here hating white folks. Do you run around here hating alligators? Do you run around here hating snakes? Do you run around here hating coyotes, mosquitoes, bats? No, when you see a coyote, you know they travel in packs. So your own code, your senses are aware. You get out of the area. If you are on a lake and you're fishing or wading in the water and you see an alligator sign, you become on code. You suspect that the alligator could be near. You protect yourself and get out the water. If a snake is in your yard, are you concerned about whether it's poisonous or not? Especially if you got a family, little kids running around in your yard. All you know is the snake gots to be dealt with before it harms you or your family members. What type of man would you be if that's not the code that you immediately jump to? You following me? If you are in any jungle for whatever reason and you hear a lion roar, well, maybe this lion don't eat humans. Maybe this is one of them vegetarian lions. Who gonna take that chance? So when dealing with people who classify themselves as white, you gotta be suspicious. Because one slip up, you could be off the planet. That's the code. Don't nobody know who's racist and who's not. You can't prove it. You got time for that? No, but you always can be on code and suspect and be ready. People Activity Radio. We are here to remove confusion. And for some reason, I don't feel I gave this subject any justice because I went all around it. There was a racial clash, there was a riot, but there were other elements going on that festered, and in 1919, that festering came to an explosion on that day, but it didn't start that day. It is just something that has to do with the legacy of anti-black racism that stirs around and boils in United States culture.